way, but the way they did this is all just about moving people and money between the carbon lobby and John Howard's inner circle. If you follow the money trails and the career paths involved, you soon see that our worst polluting industries have bought into the organisations, the advice and the individuals that John Howard trusts. So if you look at who funds the economic research that comes, for example, from ABARE, what you find is our worst polluting industries have bought their way onto the committees overseeing much of this work, as recently as last year. Some of them also have hired ABARE to do, for hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, to do greenhouse policy work, not based on ABARE's independent assumptions, but based on the paying clients' own assumptions. And some of the same industries and individual companies have even effectively donated money to ABARE's overall research program, which of course helps ABARE fund helps them meet an external funding requirement that they're subject to. And the same process works with the scientific advice. If you look at the scientific advice produced by the sections of CSIRO and the cooperative research centres that have been in John Howard's era on clean coal, you also find coal miners and coal-fired electricity generators providing much of the cash. And when it comes to the think tanks and the front groups denying the science and warning of doomsday if Australia were to cut its emissions, once again you find the carbon lobby writing lots and lots of cheques. If you look at the hired guns, those companies I mentioned a minute ago, the economists, the lobbyists, and all the other policy gurus that most Australians have never heard of, you find large sums of money flying from Australia's carbon lobby. And if you look at the Liberal Party itself, you find the same money coming from the same sources, much of it through back and side doors to avoid public scrutiny through the Electoral Commission disclosure requirements. And the career paths follow exactly the same trail as the money does. Howard's trusted circle is literally full of people who have worked inside and outside government and or the Liberal Party on behalf of polluters. On the outside they work for industry associations, corporations, think tanks and lobbying and economic consultancies. Inside government they were ministerial advisors or bureaucrats, almost always in the industry portfolio. Inside the Liberal Party they held very senior positions. They've been federal directors, party presidents and very senior party fundraisers. A constant rotation between carbon-intensive industry, federal bureaucracy and the Liberal Party has built career paths for quarry visionaries and ensured that they've always had the inside running. And taking care of this process day to day has been a small group of Canberra-based lobbyists working together under the banner of the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, otherwise known as the Greenhouse Mafia. The AIGN represents about a dozen industry associations and a similar number of multinationals, almost all foreign owned. They account for Australia's most carbon intensive industries, so coal, oil, aluminium, steel, cement, plastics and chemicals, car makers, paper and a few others. In my PhD research I interviewed over a dozen senior past and present AIGN executives. They referred to themselves as the Greenhouse Mafia and it was soon very clear why. They run the country's greenhouse policy remotely on behalf of the few interests that they serve. They explained in great detail, a million words worth of interview data, how they fixed the game time and time again. They said they reverse managed the Howard government's Greenhouse Ministerial Council in order to block Howard's environment ministers repeatedly, to stop emissions trading, to prevent Australia ratifying Kyoto, to avoid greenhouse emissions triggering federal environment approval processes, and to water down the mandatory renewable energy target and prevent its extension. They told how they reverse managed the Business Council of Australia as well through a few senior mining industry executives, and how they manipulated the broader business community into silence and into towing the line of the worst polluting sectors. They told how they got included time and time again into the international official Australian delegation to the international climate change negotiations, something I gather which is just being repeated right now. And they told on tape how they were able to get inside the bureaucracy, back inside the bureaucracy, to help write cabinet submissions, ministerial briefings and costings in at least 2 departments. I say back in the bureaucracy because before they became greenhouse mafia lobbyists, most of them were branch heads, assistant secretaries or ministerial advisors in the industry portfolio federally. Their former underlings now ran the relevant sections of the bureaucracy, and so if the public servant looked forward to a post-public service lucrative career, it made a lot of sense to go along with the greenhouse mafia boss. And on top of that, as the mafia told me, we know where all the skeletons are buried because most of them we buried. This sort of dynamic operates right across Howard's trusted circle, a blurred line between public, private and partisan. A shared belief that the interests of the nations are the same as the interests of carbon-intensive industries, and almost all of the financial, career and political connections can be traced back to the greenhouse mafia and the AIG. It's tempting for some to think that the PM is a victim in all of this, that he has been unwittingly captured by nefarious vested interests. And that's what I hoped for, I'm going to tell you, in the early days of researching this. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. Howard's gone out of his way to invite carbon capture. His scepticism about climate change goes way back, as most people here would be aware. When the UN Climate Change Convention was first negotiated at the Earth Summit in Rio in Brazil in 1992, he actually said that we should never have got on this particular truck in Rio in the first place. And since 1999, John Howard started to take control of Australia's greenhouse policy after polluters made it clear that his environment ministers were too green. So Howard took charge. He took over as the chairman of the Cabinet Committee preparing the Howard government's greenhouse policy. He hobbled the Australian Greenhouse Office by absorbing it back into the Environment Department, and he took a series of key decisions to delay emission cuts in Australia. He unilaterally announced that Australia would not ratify Kyoto, something his Environment Minister at the time, David Kemp, learned of just hours after addressing a UN meeting, I believe in Bali, saying that Australia may still in fact ratify, so you can imagine how he felt. Howard blocked emissions trading twice in Cabinet, once rolling half a dozen ministers in relevant portfolios after consulting with a group of high-polluting industry executives handpicked by his office. He put a greenhouse sceptic in charge of his backbench Environment Policy Committee. He intervened in pre-selections to keep some of the biggest greenhouse sceptics in Parliament, even when they lost their pre-selections fair and square. He appointed a coal industry executive as chief scientist, and even allowed him to keep working 3 days a week at Rio Tinto. He hired the very same economists and policy advisors as the carbon lobby does to advise him on greenhouse policy issues without any open tender process, something I've not seen any media touch. And when he finally decided emissions trading was unavoidable, he put Australia's worst polluting industries in charge of designing a scheme to their liking. He even seconded the head of the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network into his department for that purpose. Time and time again, he's knowingly gone out of his way to give the greenhouse mafia their